Our next guest speaker, Golden Edall. Am I right? Okay. The Global Mail. So Golden Edall has spent 2 years working to build out an innovative lab to help Canada's national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, better understand its own future. The identity of the lab 351, what is that? Then as it is called internally, it's very much tied to understanding what happens when user experience, data, and machine learning collide. In addition to his role as director, Globe Labs, Golden is also the Globe's corporate security officer and has had a hand in everything from the build out of the Globe data science capability to the development of the Playware, mobile and financial products, which has been an interesting journey for a one-time investing editor who used to contribute a column called Number Cruncher. So, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks for the invite, Sarah and our friends at OCAD. We've actually had a research relationship with York and OCAD now for, I think, more than 5 years. Steve, does that sound about right? And this is one of the things we're actually really proud of because we've actually shipped a bunch of real-world stuff out of that relationship. And when we first started, it was really kind of conceptual in nature, and it was kind of a research-based relationship as much as anything else that it better. And what we've seen happen along the way is that we've really been able to take some of the really great ideas from our research partners at OCAD, research partners at York, and bake them into user experiences that you guys see today if you guys read the Globe and Mail. And if you don't read the Globe and Mail, you should probably start. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk a little bit about how we built out a part of our innovation lab at the Globe and Mail. So the innovation lab at the Globe and Mail is got a few different kind of characteristics or aspects to it. One is my job is really to kind of inspire internal employees and kind of draw the best ideas out of them. And so I wander around and I ask people kind of like, talk to me about the last time you turned to someone and said, why don't we? It would be great. I can't believe we don't. And I'm trying to pull those ideas out, and then I try and set them up with enough support around them so that people who really believe those things need to be done can get to a point where they can actually build out a proof of concept or a prototype. And the original founding principle of the lab was that no one works in the lab. So literally, I didn't even work in the lab. I kind of was trying to nurse the thing around, but I didn't even work there. The reason we wanted to do that was we really wanted to have these kind of self-assembling teams where everyone was really committed to the thing and they weren't really looking at it as kind of a service arm. The thing we ran into, though, is that the very first thing every single person would say when they pitched their idea was, I have this really great idea, and then they'd say, I just need a designer. Usually followed by, and I also needed a developer. So the UX lab actually became the first permanent denizens of Lab 351. They call themselves the UX lab because their focus is really as much on user experience as design. And in fact, for the organization to understand how important UX is, we've really skewed to that character so that people understand that this is a user experience lab. They're largely designers, developers, but their specialty is really intended to be user experience. So what are some of the problems they have, though? Because they don't just work in the lab. They actually have a whole bunch of problems that are the problems of the Globe and Mail. So this is the Globe and Mail. We have a lot of digital properties, probably more than you know, and it's probably a lot more of a set of headaches than you really want to have as a set of problems to tackle. So while, you know, a newspaper is a pretty simple thing to comprehend, the nature of the proliferation of technology platforms and the need to build products that reach users at the right place, at the right time, mean we have a lot of products on the go. So obviously, desktop website you guys are familiar with, mobile website. The audience is increasingly skewing to mobile, of course, everywhere around the world. We have an investing website, heavy skew towards data representations and interfaces that allow you to kind of search, explore, and have a more personal experience. Newsletters, smartphone apps, tablet apps, a legacy investor smartphone app that I built like 100 years ago. Android apps, Android tablet apps. There's not a lot of Android tablets in the world, but we ostensibly have those. There's actually stuff that's missing on here. We have Windows apps, Windows mobile apps. The Facebook Instant Articles, Google Accelerated Mobile Pages, those actually can consume a lot of audience attention, more than you might think, particularly the AMP pages. Facebook Instant Articles, it really varies with kind of what they do with the algorithm. But this is what the design guys have to deal with. It's hugely fragmented. And what do we need them to do? We actually need them to build a better Globe and Mail. The news industry is incredibly challenged. We actually do better than pretty much everyone. We benchmark against everyone, and while we're privately held, I can tell you we do better than everyone in North America, pretty much better than anyone in the world. But nonetheless, that's kind of damning with faint praise. So what do we need our designers to do? We need them to take this footprint and make it work and help us drive a sustainable business for the long term. We've been around for 170 years, longer than Canada. We'd really like to be around for a lot longer as well. So not an insignificant set of challenges. If you guys want to see what this looks like behind the scenes, this is kind of the size of the base problem on mobile or on desktop. So 401 editorial pages, no, those aren't story pages. Those are curated section pages that people have to touch and manage. The 435 partner pages are commercial pages that have their own particular constraints and requirements and demands from advertisers who pay good money to us for the right to manage those spaces. So the design group has an incredible challenge in front of them. This is kind of what the group looks like. We're really proud of these guys. I can't even tell you how much we love them all, and we continue to invest in them. So these are digital editorial designers. So some of these people just knew how to do print before we moved them into the group. Some of them are very much on the developer side. So one is a dedicated developer who's really there intended to drive kind of like test and measurement work that requires a prototype be built and deployed in the real world. Along the way, we do a lot of other things with these people. We kind of have like a really good tradition of qualitative research. When I first joined the Globe and Mail, I spent many days behind one-way glass, kind of old school, classic, very expensive user-facing research. And that kind of like reader-centric mindset has been with us for a long time. We've changed the definition of what it means to do qualitative research a lot along the way, which I'm going to get to in a minute for. We care about it so much, though, that that capability actually sits within the lab team as opposed to in another group. We have another group called Research. Research is there to support these guys, but these guys actually have a research capability internal to the team themselves, so people who are really strong on qualitative stuff. So we have all of these products, we have all of these issues, we have all these things that they need to do. Their job is actually to understand this. So this comes out of our qualitative research. This is, in rank order, the things our readers care about most. So when our designers, when our developers are looking at the pages, we validate this list all the time. We try and build off it and work with it as like a working map of what to do. But it's not really necessarily easy to go from this to actually doing real world things. And I'm going to kind of like walk you through kind of what that looks like. So what this group did when they got together was they really needed to learn how to do experiments in the real world. So I'm going to walk you guys through. This is kind of some really basic A/B testing type stuff. But I think for you guys, if you guys are at the beginning of your career, if you're looking at academia and you want to understand kind of like what you need to understand about the world, I think it's a really good takeaway for you guys from this is to understand what I'm going to show you here in terms of what it means to design with data literacy or with an awareness of how data can inform your design to make a product better. So this is actually where we started. Can anyone here know who that is? It's Hippocrates. How many of you guys know the Hippocratic Oath? Anyone got any idea what it is? Sarah knows. Anyone else? Yeah? Do no harm. You got it. So when our designers were first introduced to A/B testing, it was actually funny. So I actually introduced A/B testing to the Globe and Mail. The designers wanted nothing to do with it, so I did a whole bunch of stuff off the reservation. When the designers finally kind of got interested in it and started to take some ownership, this is what they did. They swore to take test and measurement as a way to make sure that when they approached their design, they did no harm. We can't afford to have our newspaper and the kind of operating characteristics of our newspaper get worse. So their first thing was, okay, so we're just going to design and we're going to make sure that our designs do no harm. So I'm going to show you the first, this is actually a total dummy. This isn't the actual experiment, but this is A. This is B. Did any of you see what was removed? A, B. So the test there was basically, they thought that the page was too cluttered, and they did 100 versions of this test out of the gate. And what they were basically trying to do was they were trying to say, so I have to do no harm. We want comments, we want to preserve comments, but we don't think this comments thing at the top of the page drives much usability or user interaction. So if I can take it off the page and the comments still are as robust, still as lively, I've done no harm. And what they were basically doing is they were going through this exercise, they called it bleaching. And they were basically trying to harvest back as many pixels as possible from the legacy designs that were there while not weakening the business, which is sort of awesome. And you guys would probably be totally inclined to do this. And they did no harm. That's totally true. Their experiments were set up in such a way that basically what they were doing, if you've done any test and measurement, is they won if the null hypothesis held true. If you couldn't get a statistically significant result out of the experiment, they were able to claim victory and reap all these pixels back. Fine, it's not like the worst sin in the world that anyone's ever done, but understand there's a huge difference between that and making something better. And what we've done over the last couple of years is get them to a point where they're really honest with themselves about what it means to be better, to be explicit, to set up a hypothesis, to set up an experiment that tests that hypothesis. And I'm going to walk you guys through kind of like what some of that stuff looks like now. Actually, we'll start with some other learnings. So here's the thing about beginning to become acquainted with data, is they were learning along the way. They were learning a lot of things that proved to be very valuable over time. So this is one of the first things they learned, was they were worried that the tests were actually screwing up the validity of the results because the performance that you get, because most of the tests involve either DOM manipulation or a redirect that takes some time. And when you take that time, it results in an impact on engagement. So this is actually a fantastic test that they ran forward and back over a few different delay durations, where they gamed the amount of time that the page load was delayed in order to understand what the impact on the experiment actually was. So what they found is that at 1/100th of a second, they saw a 3% drop in engagement. So now they can discount all of their experiments and they can make sure that they're actually comparing apples to apples. So again, we started from kind of like a place that wasn't super robust, but the learning started to happen, the data literacy started to happen, they started to ask questions about the results that they were seeing. So we're pretty proud of that. But they really needed to get back to this, because these are the things they need to make better. The things they need to make better. Like as the Globe and Mail, I can tell you what we care about. We care about making people happy, first of all. It's actually really important for us as a business. Happy, engaged, we use a few various words to describe this. But it's actually a function that plays to two things, which is we need to acquire new customers and we need to retain the customers we have. We often use time as a proxy for that, so we want more visits, longer visits. We want that kind of engagement to be there. We care about subscription revenue. For us, we are very much building a future on the foundation that subscription and reader pay revenue provides because we think it's sustainable, and we think that the third thing we care about isn't as sustainable even though we still obviously engage in it. So the third thing is advertising revenue. So if you think about what we as a business care about, we care about keeping people happy, making subscription money, and making advertising money. Those are the business objectives we have. The UX Lab has a different set of objectives because they can use these characteristics, these reader needs, to drive those outcomes. And we actually have put in place a lot of systems that allow them to kind of correlate, lift in one area against those business outcomes later. So they're just worried about readers. They're just worried about the set of things that readers care about as the challenges they solve. But now they've got to be really literal when they're designing an experiment about which of these things they're trying to do. So if you look through this, pages load quickly, easy to read on my device, able to scan, scan and read easily. I think I dropped a word there. Frequently updated, helps me find what I can find. I think a bunch of these revolve around number 4, frequently updated. Some of them revolve around 5, helps me find what I want. Those things become things that you design the experiment around, and you need to put the instrumentation in place to measure out whether those things are actually happening. So the frequently updated thing is a thing we've tried through qualitative research to get at. This is the quantitative side. So now we started, we started building experiments that were intended to give people an indication of time. When was the last time something was updated? Does it work to put timestamps on the page? What kind of timestamps? We tested 1 million formats. And here's what we found. We added timestamps to the general run of the news stack. We saw exactly 0% lift in engagement. So when we do these things right, we're trying to make sure that what we get is what we want. And we want more engagement. If we're letting people know that content is more frequently updated, we want a lot more lift. What we found as we continue to do experiments, though, was there was a specific time and a specific place where those indications of time were vitally important. So we have a thing called latest news. If you attach the timestamps to the latest news piece, you see a pretty decent lift out of your experiment. So 10.3%, it's hard to get lift, just so you guys know. I don't know how many of you guys have ever heard the phrase lift. To make something better, to measure it and commit to improvement is not easy. You'll sometimes see people see experiments that say, 1,000% lift, 10,000% lift. Mostly it's bullshit. It's really hard to make stuff better, and it's really hard to make stuff better incrementally. But this is an example of the kind of things we saw. So the right representation of timestamps in the right context meaningfully change how people engage with the content. This most popular stack was another one. We used to have a thing called more stories at the bottom. We also had another thing called most popular. Oh no, it sucks because you guys can't see what I really want you to see on this one, which means you're not going to be able to see it later. In any case, keep this in mind because we're actually going to come back to this because there's a lot more going on here. But just this simple change, a little change to representation, a little change to the content type, significantly improved engagement with the pages. This is another one, and this kind of is where you find that intersection between qual and quantitative research. So on the current pages, we have like this kind of hamburger menu. You guys have seen these. You click on the hamburger menu. That's how you get to the sections. When we dropped the hamburger menu below and provided the hamburger menu or a scrubbable kind of list of sections, we saw about a 20% lift for traffic to sections. So again, if you go back to that slide on what it is we're trying to do, help me find relevant content. The hamburger menu wasn't doing a good job of helping people find the relevant content they were looking for. This did a pretty good job of that. But here's the crazier thing, is in the qualitative research that we do, we actually have a thing now where we bring people in more often and we have them talk to us. So remember I talked about the one-way glass? On the qualitative side, the lab also does something called Feedback Fridays, where every single Friday, there are actual living, breathing readers sitting down with our UX lab team, going over next generation or next generation designs, and trying to validate some of the concepts, some of the designs, very low fidelity to very high fidelity, depending on kind of like when we think we're going to introduce it into the world. So there are some people who've seen us float some really crazy ideas, and there's people who've literally seen us float like, oh, we added periods to headlines. So kind of the full range of stuff we walk them through. This is a big deal because when I got there, remember one-way glass is really expensive. Professional kind of moderators and interlocutors are very expensive. Now, because we have this capability in-house and because they do it every week, they're a machine where they are always getting real-world qualitative feedback. And you get the most amazing things out of qualitative feedback. Like remember on this page, that if you look at the top there, there's actually 2 changes on this page. There's a little button that says login. The reason that said login there is that at a later iteration of this, someone in one of those qualitative sections expressed some frustration that it was so hard to log in on the mobile website. So we made it easier, and it wasn't difficult. And it resulted in around a 500% lift in people logging in on the mobile web page. And that stuff is hard to do. I can't tell you how much we would have struggled to do that if we had set out to do it intentionally, but because it was flagged, because we understood really what the exact use case was, it was very easy to drive the result. So again, this is what happens when the designers have to be really literal. They have to say what it is they're trying to do. You only put the login in the header because you're trying to get people to log in. We know what we're doing. We're being honest with ourselves up front. You're going to see, I'm going to show you guys now some next generation designs for the Globe and Mail that are going live now over the next little while. Some other things. We love the Globe and Mail some. We all chose to work there. We're really proud of it. We put the nameplate up as big and as bold as we can. You're going to see in some of the other ones, we're going to step the nameplate down a lot. The reason we're going to step the nameplate down a lot is that for users, the users already know they're at the Globe and Mail. They're already coming to us by choice. It's not as important for us to kind of drive the brand message home. And there are some things that people need to do in that space that actually is more valuable to them. So this is kind of the beginning of what you guys are going to see roll out over the next couple months. So these pages are not nailed down yet. These are things that have been through all of the qual stuff. They're also going through quantitative testing now on the site. If you go on your mobile phone right now, you're going to see you're actually being redirected to beta.theglobeandmail.com. So beta.theglobeandmail.com has a lot of things going on. You may or may not see these designs. Usually you won't see the header. We've only tested the header in kind of like a 5% tranche, so most of the audience doesn't ever see it. But this is kind of where we're going to end up. So some basic like use cases that people wanted us to flag, that need for timely information to be presented in a way that made it clear that's what it was, that it's kind of ephemeral or passing. So this is kind of like market news, or if there's a breaking news story. People were really big on packaging by topic. So often we just kind of, we will give you the run of the news. We won't necessarily package the news, which is tie 2 or 3 stories together. In part because on mobile you have not very many pixels to play with. People really wanted to preserve that from the desktop to the mobile site in particular. As we did that, this is all part of a responsive design, so everything from this point on will be responsive forever. It's all designed to go across the rest of the platforms as well, so it's responsive and it conforms to AMP and can be transformed into Facebook Instant Articles. So that design vocabulary, the representations, the approaches to content do remain more consistent. Which doesn't say we don't understand the differences between platforms, but we get to those differences by building it in a responsive way. So this is what the homepage looks like when you roll it out. So same sort of thing, the timely information, market information, breaking news stories across the stop, packages that are responsive are flowing across both platforms. This points of emphasis thing, this is one of the things people didn't really understand is kind of like what we actually care about. In the newspaper, we do this through covers, fronts, things like focus on the weekend is a good example of a point of emphasis. We spent a lot of money to kind of clean that up for you and make it really beautiful because we really want you to care. We'd have never done as good a job of that online. Same things here, so editorial highlights, again, you can tell where there's more focus, you can tell where there's more attention. Some of the UX concerns, we realized that you can actually pick up on a lot of that interest for deeper relationships that involve heavier interaction, text entry, any kind of form-based submission procedure. We can actually bake those in a lot further down the page. The reason why is that as people get down the page, they're actually more qualified for those sorts of interactions in a weird way. And it intuitively makes sense, but it isn't something we understood previously. We would either dump this stuff in the footer or the header, and that's actually not the best place. The best place is actually to have it be adjacent to the content of interest that would lead someone to say, I want a deeper relationship. So that's all been pretty good. And this is where my presentation is kind of going to go off the rails because I don't actually have slides now for the stuff I'm going to talk about now. So where to next? So I said the UX lab was one part of the Lab 351 as a permanent resident. There's another permanent resident. So the data science group at the Globe and Mail is surprisingly robust. It's around 10 people, usually 3 to 4 PhDs. They have specialties in areas like computational linguistics, and they are very, very, very good at predicting things. So the reason why we have so many data scientists, the reason why we've invested so much, is that we were able to pick up some really good people from RIM who came in, and they started to show us some things that we didn't know we could know. So the first thing these guys did when they came in was, for a long time, we didn't really ever know what drove single copy sales on newsstands, because newsstands aren't instrumented the way the website is. But here's the thing, if you're a data scientist, you can get to that. So what we did, the very first thing that the data science group when they came in did to show our executive kind of how to know what was previously considered unknowable was they had an intern go through 7 years of Globe and Mail newspapers, and they went through it with a markup language. They taught an intern a markup vocabulary that allowed that intern to describe every single page consistently, every single front page over 7 years. Then, after a lot of analysis, a lot of regression, a lot of things to try and tease the signal out of the noise that was baked into kind of the set of editorial choices over thousands of days, They were able to generate a report that showed pretty conclusively the kinds of things that drive sales on the newsstand, the types of events, the kind of presentations, the kind of representations, the kinds of things that don't work. In a shocker, large photos of white men don't lead to things flying off the shelves. And if you look at the Globe and Mail, we do it all the time. We still do it now. It doesn't really matter if it's Trudeau or if it's Trump. It's not a winning strategy. So from there, they were able to get enough resources to start to build some hardcore big data infrastructure to do some things that mattered a lot more than that. So the intern exercise was kind of an intern in Excel and a really smart guy at the keyboard. Now, today, I will tell you that we absolutely know who is going to subscribe to the Globe and Mail tomorrow. We absolutely know who is going to quit the Globe and Mail tomorrow. Our ability to predict those outcomes has been a game changer for our business. It's one of the reasons why we think we do better than everyone else. Pixels are scarce, and we can increasingly use pixels in the viewport for the things that matter most. So increasingly what you'll see, if you have no likelihood to subscribe at all, we won't bother you with subscription offers. We won't hassle you, as it were. Your paywall rules may get more lax because you're simply never going to subscribe, so we might as well keep getting that advertising money from you and loosen up those restrictions. By the same token, if you're the sort of person who's a very high-value audience to our advertisers, we'll increasingly reserve your user experience for use by those advertisers. And/or we'll strip the advertising out if we think you're more likely to subscribe if you're not faced with kind of a watered-down editorial experience laden with news. So if you think about what that means in terms of user experience, now you're talking about user experiences that are very much changing. So the types of things that are on the page, the kind of that design vocabulary you draw from and the building blocks that you have to use are actually being changed at runtime. So as the page is rendered, the things that are in the viewport are different for each user. And we only really want to put things in the viewport that are designed to lead to the outcomes we want. And sadly, this is where I'm going to be sad about this slide. So this is what you can't see on this slide. And I'm just going to walk away. So beside this has an X, and X, and X, and X, and X. And over there was nothing. So this is one of those things that would be subtle that you guys probably wouldn't notice, but that from a design standpoint and from an interaction design standpoint is super important for you to understand. Those lists are not just different because one says most popular and one says more stories. Most popular is not just most popular based on the most popular on site for all users. It's actually a personalized version of most popular that was only showing you things that are popular that you haven't read, and also things that are popular that you haven't read that you also haven't ignored. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put things in there that are popular that you haven't had a chance to see yet. So in behind the scenes for that little unit is a ton of machine learning. There is a ton of data. And from a user experience perspective, the task is really to figure out how do we position content for people in such a way that it's compelling, that takes advantage of those things. This is a super simple representation of something that is actually pretty fantastically complicated. The recommender stack and the recommender algorithm is actually looking at several different types of classifiers in order to make a recommendation for you. Making a recommendation for someone who's been a subscriber for 10 years, for whom we have rich data on and perfectly comprehensive knowledge of everything that you've read over that period of time, is super easy to do at a super high quality level. So if we really know you, we can take advantage of algorithms that are optimized for that level of like deep, intimate personal connection. If we don't know you, there's a whole bunch of other things we can do in terms of classifying the stories for that case, in terms of classifying the users so that I can take advantage of other users who I know to a similarly minimal degree in order to put better stories in front of you. Those machine learning systems are fundamentally changing the way that we approach design, because they are all based on a probabilistic understanding of a user's propensity to respond to an offer. And that is fundamentally what is changing design. So when our user experience people come in, particularly when we onboard someone new, they all come in with the same kind of view of the world that's really founded in a lot of best practices from user-centric research, from design thinking, from the Steve Blank school of entrepreneurship and kind of early product market fit validation type stuff, all the same stuff you guys know. And then we have to start to try to break down some things. And the kinds of things that we start to break down are things like when you walk in, when you talk about a journey map, that's the best example I have is that if you guys have ever put together a journey map, if a designer talks to a designer about a journey map, they talk about it as though it's relatively fixed, like it's an entity, it's a thing that can be represented linearly. When our UX lab people talk to our data scientists in Lab 351, every single point in that journey map is the sort of point where what do we want to know? We want to know how likely is that action or activity? How often is the opportunity to do that going to happen? And how many branches, how many forks from there are there? And are there forks I can predict better or worse? Because if I can predict outcomes from a data science perspective, that can help drive the design so that the design is more effective at helping the user reach their actual underlying goal. So instead of assuming that everyone has the same set of goals, instead of assuming that everyone is going to have the same journey map or the same life cycle or the same customer profile, or even a different set of customer profiles, but from, again, a pretty fixed and finite list, we're really trying to get to a point where all the designers really understand that design is constrained by the pixels in the viewport and by the range of opportunities for that user to explore additional avenues. And we're trying to take that kind of constraint in that confined space, and we're trying to make sure that when we build those spaces from a design perspective, from a UX perspective, that the design and UX vocabulary is such that it can be dynamically shaped on the fly in order to help people do what it is that they're actually here to try to do. So for us, it's very different from where we started and from where the Globe and Mail has a tremendous history. We have an amazing editorial staff with a ton of history at being right and or being smart and or deciding what the news of the day should be tomorrow. We don't ever want to lose that capability, and we definitely consider it a competitive advantage. But we also think that we can take advantage of machine learning. We increasingly think we're going to be able to take advantage of developments in and around different forms of AI that are probably a little more subtle than a lot of the kind of machine learning that we've been using to date in order to generate user experiences that really work for you guys, that you guys find super interesting, that are less like the one front page to rule them all, and more like the thing that'll work best for you today, right now, wherever you are, on whatever device. And it's, you know, we are looking for designers who understand that. And so if you guys can build up that capability and that skill set and understand that it's maybe not as important to do the thing that you think is the right thing to do as it is to do the set of things that are most likely to lead to the best outcome for the users, that's going to be a competitive advantage for you guys in the future. So you all need to trust your eye, you all need to trust your instinct, but at the same time, learn to question your biases, and if you can figure out how to use machines to help better inform you of your biases, how likely is it that you are right is a really good thing to know. So I'm going to close with just kind of like a small anecdote. So I will tell you my own introduction to A/B testing was brutal and vicious. So I was responsible. So I wasn't allowed to play with the editorial design pages, but I did have the right to play with the payment funnel pages. And so there was a point at which I was like, okay, look, I got it. I know exactly what to do. So we designed this payment funnel page for our newspaper products that was the most simple, beautiful, and elegant payment page you can possibly imagine. I thought it was lovely. It was simple. It was one button. There was a whole bunch of stuff on the original page that was really dumb. So we had basically 3 products. So you could buy the newspaper plus print, or plus digital, or the newspaper on the weekend. And you could buy it over 3 time durations. You could pay every 2 weeks, you could pay every month, or you could pay annually. So that was 9 combinations of pricing and product. And here's the thing. There were really only 2 because there were no discounts for any of the time durations. The price was exactly the same. So if you pulled out your calculator, you would know there wasn't anything on offer. So this new payment page was designed to look like an Apple page. It was designed to have basically nothing but the essentials there and to get people the best deal with as little friction as possible. We were all about reducing friction. When we introduced the experiment, my beautiful page was more than 70% worse than the existing page. So why? So as we started to unpack it, we started to unpack it through qualitative research. The reason why my beautiful, simple, elegant page sucked so much is that most of the people who buy our products, this is the hypothesis, and it's still the working hypothesis today, are the kind of people who don't buy a Toyota Yaris. If you've ever gone to the Toyota site and configured a Yaris, you'll find there are no options at all. You don't get to choose anything. You just have to take what you're given. Our audience, the kind of demo we skew to, are the kind of people who are used to buying things like a Mercedes or a Porsche, where when you go to the configuration options, there's a million things for you to configure, and you get to buy your own thing. And so that feeling of a higher friction funnel that gave our users control over the purchasing experience turned out to be more effective at closing the deal for them. They're the kind of people who wanted to buy the thing that they wanted to buy and not take what was forced down their throat. So it's I will never forget it. It was quite humiliating, to be honest, but it was informative, and I will say every single designer has had the same experience with something they thought was true along the way. So test, do your qual, get used to quant, and start to explore kind of what's possible on the edge of the quantitative side. That's my advice. Questions?
Balance the responsibility of providing an unbiased set of news to the users and the importance of providing a user-friendly interface?
So it's a good question. It's obviously the question the newsroom is most worried about. I guess part of it comes down to kind of just like the editorial mandate and the mission and the ownership structure that we actually have. So we are not part of any corporate conglomerate. We are owned by a company called Woodbridge, which is the capital arm of the Thompson family, and they own us 100%. Because of the strength of that ownership group, we actually have a tremendous amount of editorial liberty, and we don't necessarily have to worry about a lot of the competing commercial interests some other publishers might have to deal with. They have made it very clear to us that our mission is quite literally to help build a better Canada. And so that's part of our mission statement. We do take it seriously. Our editors, our journalists all believe in that kind of same sense of a shared mission. And you will see us very often do things that financially make no sense at all. We won a Michener Award, I think, 2 years ago for a set of stories on thalidomide, which was wrongly allowed to be provided to Canadians with horrible health impacts. And that's the sort of journalism that our owners want us to do. When it comes to what do we do on the design and user experience side to do the same thing, we understand that kind of that value, that editorial rigor and integrity is something that we need to account for in all of the machine learning systems. So we're putting in place mechanisms that basically indicate to the system when something is of higher brand value. The funny thing is that we actually find a lot of that stuff is already represented anyways because of things like placement and promotion decisions. We're kind of obsessed with the idea of promotion bias, the idea that we can make a story successful by over-promoting it, and trying to understand what the cost implications are of doing that. What we found along the way is we've gotten editorial to kind of give us that signal that tells us how important a story is from a brand perspective. We actually find that that's already baked into the promotion decisions that they make, and we always have that available to us as a signal. So even as we optimize, we're optimizing against a very large number of business outcomes where that idea that we need to be who we are is one of the things we can't ever lose. Does that sort of make it clear? It's kind of two parts. One is good owners. The second is we know there are humans who make good decisions, and we try to respect those even on the machine learning side. Yeah?
I'm curious in the, let's say, evolution of design. It's really nice that you're changing the design in order to optimize the happiness of your clients. In the beginning, I guess you make really big increases of engagement of the clients. Are you still making those big increases, or
are we still seeing the lift?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. No. These design processes, we don't really do big bangs on the digital side. We don't want to do that particularly anymore, which isn't to say we wouldn't, but for the most part, we're really trying to approach it in an iterative way. I will tell you that on any given day, there are between 20 and 30 experiments running. Some of them are demonstrating lifts, some of them are invalidating hypotheses, and that's actually just as important, right? So you don't do an experiment in order to generate lift, you do an experiment to generate learning. So you need to have a hypothesis, and that's one of the things we teach the designers. They have to be really literal. So we have a thing called a pattern library. You guys might have seen these. Etsy has a great one. We have a pretty awesome one. The pattern library is the definitive collection of all the UI and UX elements that the Globe and Mail uses. Every single element is designed to fulfill a purpose. So we know what that purpose is, and if you have a hypothesis about why that feature is not working, you have to say, this is my hypothesis, this is my competing theory on why it's not doing what it needs to do, or why another variation of that can do a better thing. And that stuff is pretty much continuous. We try to do it, we could probably do more experiments, but we're trying to avoid too much cross-contamination, so we try and kind of keep it to a human manageable number. There's actually there's a version of our site in the future that is more or less just one giant experiment. We haven't quite decided to go down that road yet, but it's definitely, I know LinkedIn has already done it. They did it about 6 years ago. There isn't a base template for LinkedIn. There is simply a set of constraints on the objects that are required for a page, and the versions of those you see are always experimental. Or at least they were. That was as of like a year ago. I don't know if they are still today, but we're certainly seeing that stuff as an interesting possibility in the future. We're not quite there yet.